Our first keynote today is from a 1985 graduate. Her name is Susan Miller. I only got to know Susan recently, and for good reason. Back in '85, Susan was graduating from Poly, and she didn't have a job. I'm going to let her tell you what happened next, but her path was to Langley, Virginia. I happen to live right next to Langley, Virginia. It's really not a town, it's just an area across the Potomac from Washington, D.C., but that area is home to the Central Intelligence Agency. Our Cal Poly journalism website has a picture of Susan on it. It says she works for the State Department. That wasn't true. The CIA is divided into categories. Generally, there are analysts who interpret data and information, and there are covert officers, spies. Susan Miller, for 35 years, served in the covert service protecting America. She rose through the ranks. Her first posting was in Moscow. She had to learn how to speak Russian. I'm sure she'll tell you a little bit about that. She's been a station chief in charge of a group of CIA officers who were operating in a foreign country. And she was an assistant director in the CIA for East Asia, China, and for counterintelligence, looking for spies inside the CIA. I recently read Tim Weiner's book. He's a journalist who's committed his career to reporting on the CIA, and he wrote, "Journalists and spies are not all that different. Recruiting agents overseas was not unlike developing sources at the CIA, though reporters didn't pay for the information and spies did, handsomely. The spy and the scribe both depended on establishing trust. They were driven by a thirst for hidden truth, and they knew it could take years before the secrets they learned gave them a deep understanding of the way things really worked. The difference was that the journalists wanted to know the world, and the CIA had the power to change it." Please welcome 85 grad Susan Miller. Yeah, and then phone it down. For you to stand up. Get it set for you.
Just kidding. Hi, guys. I can say that in California. In Washington, D.C., it's like, there's girls here too. But, you know, in California, we say guys for everybody. I would first like to thank the Cal Poly Journalism Department for inviting me to speak here today, and the students and professors who worked on making all of this happen. It's really cool that Cal Poly has an event for its journalism majors and alumni, and I think that's something that should be continued. I also want to thank Cal Poly leadership back then and now for providing an excellent education for students in every major. There are thousands of students over the years who have had righteous and fulfilling careers, like my father, who spent 40 years at Hewlett-Packard as an engineer thanks to this university. I myself owe my 40-year career, almost 40 years, at CIA, to this school, specifically to this department, and all of the J-School professors who taught me, like Mr. Hayes, to be hardworking, honest, fair, and accurate in reporting. As an aside, I also do owe my career to whoever was running the Cal Poly Career Center at the time, as it was called back then. For you young people, that's what, you know, the web used to be, sort of. And who decided to display a "come work at CIA" poster along with applications for CIA, weirdly along brochures for journalist positions in print, radio, and TV. And that's where, you know, me and a friend of mine said, let's just do this. This can't be real. And then, you know, whatever. Next thing you know, what happened? My friend didn't get in. She didn't have as good a grades. They were looking for, and she really loved the party scene at Cal Poly. But she ended up doing well, too, later on. So from the beginning of my education, Mr. Hayes and the journalism department correctly expected excellence from us, such as seeking multiple sources on controversial topics to ensure the resulting article was true and had as many details to support the story. I also remember Mr. Hayes correctly telling us to get out of the newsroom. I think anybody who's had him there was like, what are you doing here if you're not writing something up? And so if we weren't actively writing up an interview that we had just had, he really wanted us to keep getting the news, which is the only way that a paper can run or any other news forum. And he was right, both for the budding journalists in the room and the one budding spy in the room, me, which I didn't know I was a budding spy at the time. But proving my point, in my first training class at CIA, we were told that the only way a CIA officer abroad can collect and disseminate intelligence, which is our version of an article, is if we get out of the CIA station and the US Embassy and actively look for sources, meet sources, and constantly think about ways we can fill gaps in our coverage. So I was indeed one of those Mustang Daily reporters that listened and got out well. And first, because I didn't want a bad grade, and second, because I realized that was the way to have success, and that really helped me in my career. Hard-hitting news and intelligence does not come from because we were smart. It came to fruition because we got out of the newsroom. We worked on finding multiple sources and wrote accurate articles of interest to readers. In addition, we respected Mr. Hayes and knew, because we knew he was good at his art. He was a real reporter. We respected all of the journalism professors. Mr. Hayes was unique because of his background. And he really cared for us and focused on our success. So when I joined CIA back in 1985, I carried his coaching into my career, and indeed, the only way to get intelligence for the US government is to get out of the building. In our case, it was an embassy where we worked undercover, and to find sources that could help the American government figure out how to react to situations unfolding in the world, like the fall of the Soviet Union, like 9/11, like what's going on in China, what's happening in Taiwan, and all of these other world events that have happened over the years. To get this, and so because of this, we were overseas most of our lives. Out of that 39 years, I want to say a good 30 of them, maybe a little less, were indeed overseas. For those of us that did my job, I should say, the collection part. We have analysts that spend the entire 40 years at CIA as analysts. So for me, to get this done, I had a lot of long hours. It was not 9 to 5. Anybody that is working on the Mustang Daily that now knows this or has worked in it knows that it is not 9 to 5. It happens at all times of night. It might happen in the middle of the day when you're working on something else. You have to stop that and start working on a piece that is more pertinent for that day. And so for me on the streets, I had the same kind of long hours, and I was also actively looking for sources, not in Moscow, because we didn't recruit our assets/agents in Moscow. We just ran them there. But we would recruit them in other places, like I would go to a diplomatic reception, I would see a Soviet there, and I would go over and talk to him. Oh, you like butterfly collecting? I like butterfly collecting, let's go butterfly collecting. And you start working and seeing if he has any kind of desire to A, betray his country, B, but you don't ask that outright, let's put it that way. you kind of like, well, so how are things going? And and wherever where you're from, and they'd be like, well, it's going fine. I'm happy. And like, are you? So that's the kind of stuff we would do. And then we would, as time worked on, we would work on them, and it took sometimes months. I remember one took a year, and by the time you get to that end of that year and you say to them, by the way, I'm going to break my cover, I'm not State Department, I'm CIA. And I can remember one of these guys saying, oh, thank God, because I wasn't going to go work for the State Department, but, I'd work for you guys are righteous, kind of thing. I'm like, okay, that'll work, sort of thing. So again, always out on the street, doing surveillance detection route in Moscow, looking to see if anybody was behind me. Did the same thing in the other countries I worked in where I was still undercover, which was in Poland was the next one, and was doing that too, just to make sure that we weren't being covered and weren't going to be caught. And we also did impersonal communication. Do you guys even know what that is? Dead drop. Have you heard of a dead drop? Yeah. So this was a method where we would instruct an agent to drop their report, like in Moscow. We would instruct him through whatever means we were contacting him in, or we instructed him before he left Europe or wherever we recruited him that this is what he was going to do a dead drop. This was a method where we would get them to drop a report to us in a like a waterproof trash bag under a hollowed out log or inside a realistic rock that we fabricated and gave to them to use, and told them to put it in a specific site. And then we had to write up these sites with absolute accuracy in order to ensure that we found the drop. And there's been one that is still out there, not from my time in Moscow, but from the next station. Nobody can find it still to this day. So that the asset could actually find the rock, or find the concealment device. If we didn't do accurate writing, kind of like with journalism, we would lose our ability to provide the information our analysts and leadership in the U.S. government needed. So also thanks to my education here, I had confidence as a junior officer to conduct interviews, to do briefings, and to interact with senior officials in a professional way. This came in handy when, in 1990, in Moscow, I was asked by my manager to give a briefing, and I was really junior. I was like the juniorest of junior. I was a GS7. They don't even make that anymore, by the way. And so my manager was like, let's, help the young person. I thought he thought he was doing something really good. He did something that scared me to death, but I did it. And so I was super nervous, but I fell back on the training here, because I had a little bit of training of briefing managers, but it was more about recruiting sources, finding sources. And so this opportunity really gave me a understanding of how I can get the information across. And so I told him that about this asset, as we called them. Movies call them agents. They're not agents. We're not agents. We're case officers, and our agents are assets, if that makes any sense. And so about Soviet plans for ship developments in Asia and the Pacific in the time of war. That was a really cool agent we had. And as such, the risk of running him inside Russia was worth the gain, as the information he was privy to was vital to the U.S. and our allies for success if we went to war with the Soviets. This would have helped us win. So this was really important information. I then explained that the details of the operation, that we were not meeting this guy on the street in Moscow as it was too dangerous, and that we instead obtained the information through what CIA calls impersonal communication methods. In this case, we had concealed the money and instructions for him inside a fabricated rock. And it looked like a rock. If you'd picked it up, it was lighter than a rock, to be honest, because the agent would have to, we would say, put it on a real rock and break it open, and you'll find your stuff in it, right? That kind of thing. And so, so I explained this operation to this manager, and then I showed him the rock. And he looked at it for a few minutes, and he said, "Does this rock look like a rock concealment, like a real rock? Or do you think it looks more like a loaf of bread?" And I'm like, okay, what do I say? And so, it prompted me to think for a moment and wing my answer with confidence, which I learned here too. And I said, yeah, it does kind of look like a loaf of bread, but don't a lot of rocks also look like loaves of bread? And he thought for a moment and said, oh yeah, right, they do. And so my career was saved that day, thanks to me being able to think on my feet, thanks to the journalism program here. Mr. Hayes and other professors also taught us to embrace teamwork and not to be so arrogant as to think each of us individually always has the right answer. He and the other professors at the J School taught us about the importance of taught us the importance of collaboration, highlighting how vital teamwork is to success on individual articles that might only have your byline on it, but other article, making the article better by having two bylines on it because you both come at it from a different perspective. He encouraged us to make friends to have friendships in the newsroom, and using these friendships to run ideas by fellow students and or our professors so that we could indeed achieve the goals we set out for ourselves. So we student reporters embraced this idea, perhaps at first because we wanted good grades, to be honest, but soon after because we realized he was right. Our product was better by engaging with others rather than being lone wolves. This idea of teamwork was also instilled in us junior officers at CIA. We too were encouraged to talk about ideas with fellow junior officers as well as with our supervisors. And frankly, I can't think of a single success I had in CIA that was not based on teamwork. Teamwork was particularly important as a junior officer in Moscow, as some of my colleagues were in the trunk of my car at times, and I was in theirs. Do you want to know why? This was a way that we could, our embassy had a garage that was below stairs. And so we could sneak somebody out of the embassy in the trunk. It was called, there's a technical term, a trunk escape. Are you doing a trunk escape today? Yes. So anyway, so a trunk escape. And so, yeah. So we would, somebody would be in the trunk. I would drive them out, and I would see if KGB surveillance was close behind me. If it was too close behind me, I would abort it. I would just go to a couple of stops, go to a shop, the few shops that were actually open in Moscow at the time, and all the rest of the stuff, and go buy some food or whatever, and then I would come back to the embassy garage and let the guy out and say, nah, it can't work. But when it did work, if the surveillance was far enough back, and like I said, I almost always had surveillance, but sometimes it was like what we called harassing, where they're like 4 feet away from your car, and then all the way to a couple blocks away, you could just see the same car kind of following you around. And so on that type, we could do that trunk escape, trunk escape, where we could go around a corner, you fold the seat forward, and you jump out of the car, and they wouldn't see us. Eventually, they found this out, and we had to, most of these Tradecraft type things, the Russians or the Chinese or whoever find it out, and we have to change it. But that was a couple years later that they figured all of that out. So, yeah, exactly. So, let's see, where am I going here? So, working collaboratively with peers and helping each other on complicated problems and having the confidence and courage to ask questions is vital for our success, and that's one of the things that we we really worked on as well in CIA with our bosses. One thing I want to mention is when all of you who are young here, you're going to be a manager someday. Keep your door open. Mr. Hayes did. It was really rare when you would kind of poke your head in and say, I have a question for you. And he would say, oh, I'm working on something. I can think of once I remember, maybe it was twice, but his door was open for us when we needed his help. And so when you become managers, keep your door open, and when you're not in a meeting, and let them know that they can come in. Super important piece as well. And finally, I want to talk about speaking truth to power. We must all embrace that we must embrace in our respective careers. Why is this important? Well, your ultimate loyalty is to the truth, even when that can be uncomfortable. Politely call out inaccuracies when you hear or see them in your newsroom. Be bold, fair, and approach a fellow reporter or editor if you think that they are producing something that is flawed. On the flip side, when each of you become a leader or an editor, someday, you too need to be open to people coming into your office for drop-bys and suggesting changes in a story or just to talk something out. And that's one of the best ways to coach people. Another goal for all of you to remember is to remember who your audience is when writing. It changes depending on where you live, and what's important in South Carolina is going to be very different than what's important here in California, et cetera. And you have to be able to be flexible on all of that. Actively follow what your readers or viewers or podcast audience are saying about your products. Adjust your style if needed. Be open to change. Because your readers and listeners and viewers are your customers. Those are the ones that are paying your salary, let's be honest, right? So for me, during my career, the audience for our products and briefings were the president, Congress, the Senate, the military, as well as other officers in the intelligence community. I once had to brief the NATO summit with Jens sitting right next to me. I was terrified. At that point, I was a CIS-5, which is like a 4-star general. I was still terrified. But I did it. I got, on what I learned here and what I learned at CIA, and I was able to do that. So for me, during my career, the audience for our products and briefings were the president, Congress, the Senate, the military, as well as others in the intelligence community. But what's so cool about journalism is for you guys as journalists, your customer is so much bigger and more important than CIA's, to be honest, because your audience is not just the government or our allied government people. Rather, your audience is, the entire world. And so remember this. And so I wish you all your best as you move forward in your programs and your careers. And I promise you, if you seek adventure as I did, in whatever form, you will not be retiring with regrets. And I had no regrets when I retired. So thanks for listening to me, and I'm happy to answer a few questions.
Take that microphone over there.
Okay, I'm going to leave this.
Yep. Thank you very much. Yeah. And I'm going to make you hold that microphone. Oh, this is going to be so much fun because she didn't tell a lot of war stories that I know. We're going to have a great time. Sit down, Susan. We're going to have some fun.
Wait, I think I have to go.
First of all, let's talk a little bit about the CIA in general. I think the movies have given us all a sense of what you do. You gave us a sense of it. You talked about information collection, passing it up the chain. Then you became a senior manager. As you mentioned, this is something that happens in the military. You give a comparable ranking for officers in other agencies. So Susan was basically a 4-star general. Now, that's great. I'm really happy for her. I went on a military base to do a seminar, and I was like, a one-star general, so I'm just saying. For a day, for one day, yeah. One day I was a one-star general. So talk about the CIA, of what you really did. Were you ever, I mean, because the movies are always showing the intensity and, running from the enemy, and your job was really about collecting information, talking to people, getting them to give you information. It's not like the movies.
No, I mean, first of all, unless you're in a war zone, you're not carrying a gun. Let's start with that. All these, CIA officers that are running through Moscow indiscriminately shooting at people with, what we call casuals around, normal people around is not true. But there are some moments of excitement and things like that. I remember there was this one operation that they really, really, really needed done by me. And normally if we had surveillance behind us, we would abort, because it was just too, you couldn't go and meet that agent that you wanted to meet. But my boss told me, and he actually picked me because I was a Californian. He goes, "I know you drive fast like a Californian." And I'm like, yeah, I do, and I have tickets to show it all over Washington, D.C. And he said, "I want you to lose surveillance today. We really need you to do this." And I was like, okay, and so I did. I lost surveillance. And it was easy to do because back in those days, they didn't have good cars. They had these crappy Soviet Ladas and Travantes from East Germany and things like that. And I had an American car, and I totally lost them, and it was the greatest moment. I had a ball doing it. And so I went out and did the thing I needed to do, and it went really well and all of that. I came back, and again, in Moscow, it snows 3 feet a night during the wintertime, and this was wintertime. The roads actually, weirdly, because they had all these really old ladies with these stick brooms that would clean the roads. They didn't even have, back in the day, the real snowplow or anything like that, So anyway, so one of these, he said, so I came back from that particular op, and I parked at my apartment building, which had a small parking lot behind it, and it was full of diplomats. They separated diplomats from Russians because they didn't want us, really talking to the regular people. And so I was in this one, and so I go to sleep at night, and I get up the next morning after I'd done this op. I'd lost surveillance. I came back to my house, blah, blah. And I am driving out of the driveway. It was near Gorky Park. And I come out, and I see 3 surveillance cars lined up. I'm like, okay, here's my punishment for actually having lost them, right? And as I'm coming out, they immediately follow in behind me, one guy in each car and everything, kind of thing. And as I get onto Leninsky Prospect, which is it's like a 5-lane freeway, but it has lights on it. I guess that was a Soviet thing they thought was a good idea. And so I got on there, and I realized that something weird was happening with my car. And so I pulled over, and I get out of my car, and I see a hole in the front right wheel that looked like from of the car, or tire, not wheel, sorry. My dad was very specific on that too. He knows how to do cars. So he, and I saw a hole in the sidewall of, this tire, and then I saw a hole in the sidewall of a tire in the back left. And I'm like, it is minus 30 out, and I know how to change tires. My dad didn't want me to get picked up by like a Charles Manson or something like that here in California driving down to Cal Poly. And so I knew exactly how to change a tire, and I could have done it, but I'm like, I didn't do this, so I'm not doing it, And so I just sat there in my nice warm car. I had a Russian newspaper, Pravda, that I got every morning at my apartment, and I'm reading it. And finally, after about 20 minutes, and their cars back then had no heat. No heat. I had heat. And so one of them came up to me and said, "Excuse me, ma'am, I can't help but see that there's a diplomat, that something is wrong, and I want to make sure, our diplomats are okay," and pretending to be like a regular Soviet citizen or whatever. And I said, "Yeah, somehow, I don't know how," and this is all in Russian. "I don't know how, but I got two flat tires, and I mean, look at me. I'm a blonde. I lived in California. I don't know what I'm doing." And so but don't worry about me. I've got heat in my car. I'm waiting for somebody from the from the American embassy to drive by, and I'll wave them down. And that might take, a few minutes, some time. And this guy goes back to the other two cars, and he's talking to them, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I can just see it. I can't hear it, anything. Next thing I know, all three of them come up, "We'll change your tires." So to me, yes, I picked up a concealment device that gave us a spy's name, but this actually is the best op I ever had, was making the guys who got rid of my tires.
Not that you didn't do spy stuff too. What, 6 months after Cal Poly, you're in training and they're putting a shoulder...
Oh, God, yes.
Give me a couple minutes of that.
Yeah, this was sort of a surprise. So I was hired by CIA to be, like I said, a case officer or a spy. But back in the day, it was everybody had to go through a paramilitary course. And part of it was because a lot of CIA officers were being sent down to like Nicaragua and El Salvador because we had proxy wars going on there and things like that. And so they decided, instead of training people from the beginning in paramilitary. So the first course was just an introduction to CIA. Here's what a directorate is. Here's what different parts of it do. And that lasted 3 months. The next part was 6 months of paramilitary training that involved shoulder-launched rockets, Uzis, and the Uzi one was, doing Uzis and stuff like that. And the Uzi one was interesting because it was at night. So what could go wrong with a bunch of young people with an Uzi at night? And what we were supposed to hit with this Uzi, or it was kind of sick, actually. There was these like barrels, metal barrels. Like an oil barrel.
55-gallon oil.
Yeah, that was it. And it had phosphorus smiley faces on it. And so we're supposed to hit this smiley face, So here we are with these, Uzis going, like that, at these smiley faces. It was a little sick, but, it was fun and good team building. One other story I can do from that time is we also learned how to do rifles and all the rest of the stuff. And then we also did shotguns. And so Pete was one of these paramilitary guys who was in Nam. He was always talking, "I was in Nam. I was, going around, my, stomach and mud and blah, blah, blah." And he was like a really tough guy. He was a nice guy, but, he was tough. He was tough. And so I'm in line. And by the way, there's only like 8 women in this class of 60. And we were split into two groups of 30. And so I was one of only a few women, in that group. And so we're doing shotguns, and we are, the guys are doing shotguns. We're doing trap shooting. If anybody's here done trap shooting, right? And so we're doing trap shooting. And so 1-1-1. Now it's my turn, and Pete, Mr. Nam, says to me, "Oh, everybody," and he was joking-ish. And he says, "Everybody, let's watch the little blonde from California shoot, the little disc. Oh, this is going to be hilarious, And I looked at him and I went like this. And he kind of went, huh. I was the only one that powdered all 5. because of my father taking me to do trap shoot. And when I finished, I looked at him, and he saluted me. It was fabulous, and just a great guy. Yeah.
We're gonna, if you have a question, we're gonna run some microphones around, and give me one more second. I have one more thing I want to ask. I would like to talk about some journalism before we finish as well, and what you think about the state of journalism. But you had a long career. You rose to some of the highest ranks of the CIA. You're in that group of the first women to reach upper management in CIA. What is the one thing you did during your career you thought was important for the country and you're very proud of? You want to come back to it? I'll get somebody else, give you a...
Yeah, I'll think about that one. It's hard to say. I recruited an agent that ended up giving us the names of every single spy in NATO at that time, and it was really cool.
All right, let's take some questions. Michael, you got...
I read your interview in the Tribune, and you mentioned the most recent cataclysmic thing that happened for you, which was having your security clearance yanked. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, just a quick thing. So back in 2016, I headed the Counterintelligence Mission Center, and I was in charge, therefore, of the paper that we wrote after we got some from really good agents meaning sources that we were paying, that the Russians were trying to influence the election in favor of Trump. And this was even before Trump was elected. He'd already been named the nominee, but he was not yet elected when we started looking at this. And so as it moved forward in time, Trump was actually briefed on our paper, which found that it was long. We had a lot of, sightings of what the sources were, and that we didn't give the names of the sources, but we'd say a source with really good access to this information, or first-hand access or second-hand access, who's reported well in the past. That's how we would describe these sources. And it was. He asked, is this source really good? And I'm like, yeah, it's a really, really good source. And he said, so you think this is right, that we actually have spies in NATO? Yes, I really, really do. And that means that then we send that out to the FBI so that they can look, not just the FBI, but also some NATO partners like the Brits and some other things like that, so that they could look for that. And we still have to protect the identity of our source. And believe me, every single one of those, like NATO guys that we talked to would say, tell me about your source, and I'd say, no. I mean, what are you going to do? You can't do that. But that was something that we would do kind of regularly in situations like that. And so it was very different than journalism. We're still getting that news out to the FBI in that case, so that they could go and arrest people. Then again, FBI sometimes could be hard to work with because we would, when we found a spy, again, I want to say it was several months later, we found there was another spy that was out there after the other ones had been taken care of, arrested, or not coming into our building every day or whatever. We got information that was clear to us at CIA. It was coming from the FBI. And the FBI agents came to talk to us, and they said nobody in the FBI would ever spy for Russia. Meaning that you CIA, you guys, and you guys at State Department, and you guys in the Pentagon, some of you spy for, but we never would, And we're like, it's 100% a FBI guy. And here's why. And we explained, it's all FBI information. It was like things that we wouldn't know as a CIA officer, like where are the safe houses that FBI uses to start surveillance against diplomats in Washington? We don't do that. That is absolutely an FBI guy that knows that kind of information. So long story short is there was a blinder on theirs because they just couldn't fathom one of their people could make a mistake, and a big one like committing espionage against America. And so sure enough, we finally were able to get, I won't tell you how, but we were able to get a recording of this guy talking on the phone with the Russian, and we handed it to the FBI guy, and he had the earphones on, and we'd already listened to it, and we're listening to it, and he sits there, and he says the F word, and he says, I know this effing effer, I know exactly who that is. And we're like, FBI? And he's like, yeah, and this was after they had this bias, which is, again, something that you can't have as a journalist, you can't have as a spy. You have to listen to what the data tells you. And after that, we got along fine with these dudes and all that. Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah. And so my clearance. Let me go back to this real quick. My clearance. In 2016, I was doing counterintelligence, and we found that the Russians had indeed done tried to influence the election in favor of Trump. And that was briefed to him by our then director, Brennan. And Trump was like, righteous, and he was fine with it. And then what happened was, it was a while later, but we started hearing things like, are you sure? I don't believe this. That's what he was saying to his President's Daily Brief, PDB briefers. When they would see this, I didn't see this, kind of thing. And we just kind of let it go. And then we got some lead that he was really, really mad about this and wanted to do something about it. And that was when I was called up to our OGC officer, who's the head lawyer for CIA, her name was Courtney, and I can't stand her to this day. She was a Trump appointee. Her dad was a big Trump donor. And she hated everybody in CIA. All of us had bad, meetings with her previously on other things. So she calls me up and she says, hey, Susan, you basically are going to be put on, in a hearing, the Bar Durham hearing, if you can remember those words, you can look it up later, in a hearing that could lead to a criminal trial. And I'm like, for what crime? And she couldn't tell me because there wasn't one, but so she made something up or mumbled something, I forget what it was. And I immediately went downstairs to my lawyer. Every unit in CIA has a lawyer because, unlike the Russians, we like to be on the right side of the law and not get in trouble. And so I go to my lawyer and I said, so are you my lawyer for this? And he goes, well, let me check. And he calls. He goes, no. He goes, this could lead to a criminal indictment. And so you need to get a clearance holding criminal lawyer. And I was like, those are a thing? I didn't even know that. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, then you tell me who is the meanest, nastiest, best criminal lawyer with a clearance. And he goes, oh, you want Ken Weinstein. And I'm like, I want Ken Weinstein. And it was like that with Mark Zaid later, by the way. I was like, yeah, that's it. I'll get Ken Weinstein. So I sit down with Ken, And I said, so why are they thinking about a criminal charge? And he said, I can't figure it out either. I'm like, okay, great. And so what do I do? And he goes, well, you have to go to this hearing and with Bar Durham, and I will represent you there. And I have a signal that if I start tapping my finger, it means shut up and I'm going to talk, because I'm mad at them or something. Like they ask a question, and if I'm tapping a finger after that question, let me answer it, kind of thing he would do. And so they would ask me, questions like, and this is how it went. Tell us how you hate all Republicans, and that's why blah, 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 blah. And I'd be like, excuse me, I'm from California, and I was a Reagan fan. So, that sort of thing. And I, at the time, I was still registered Republican, and I'm like, yeah, it's okay, all the rest of the stuff. And it kind of went on like that. And so tell us, how you hate President Trump and everything else. And in my head, I'm thinking, I didn't hate him until now, but I didn't say that. And I said, no, I don't hate President Trump. I don't know him. I've never even met him. That thing. And this went on and on and on for like 5 hours. And my criminal lawyer every now and then would say, she's not answering that question, when it was really stupid. And I thought that was righteous. I thought this is good, and all the rest of the stuff. So I was there for about 5 hours. Doing that. And at the end of it, they thanked me, and they thanked Ken, and I walked away. I went on to other tours, and nothing happened. Until I was down, the story, down in Miami, going to a baseball game, and I called up to go find out what my next gig was, because now I'm retired, and my next gig was going to be another training course in CIA, and my point of contact, a good friend of mine named Mike, I said, hey, Mike, what's going on? What building do I have to go to? Blah, blah, blah. And because the CIA is not just one building now, it's like dozens, which is probably scary to you guys, but it's not as scary as it should be. Anyway, so I go to him and I said, and I said, I really... need to know. Mike calls back, he goes, you don't have a clearance. I said, I do too, I re-upped it for 4 years. It should still be active now. He goes, no, you don't have it. And so after a lot of back and forth and this and that and everything else, I found out that I didn't have a clearance because Trump took it away. So I could not work anymore. And he then did that. I was the first, and then a couple weeks later, he did a couple more, like former DNI Clapper, because former heads of NSA and other get briefings and things like that. And so he did that and everything else. And that's when I called my new lawyer, Mark Zaid, the other mean one, just like Ken Weinstein, and said, what do I do? And he goes, I'm on it. And he says, and I'm furious too, because he just took away my clearance too. Zaid, there's a lot of lawyers in Washington that have clearances so that they can do different cases that require it. And so long and short of it is we're still waiting. And he's pretty sure we'll be able to get it back because it was done illegally. You can only take clearances away for one of like 3 reasons, and the reason he took them away was not.
And without clearance, you're not able to do some of
I'm
the
not
work
able to
you'd
work
like
right now.
I want to try and get a couple more. We're almost out of time. Somebody has a microphone?
Yeah, I do. I have a question. I was very curious about your recruiting, when you were recruiting assets, and I wondered, did your journalism training help you with that? And did you find men were better or women, or what kind of qualities were you looking for?
I was looking for people who were willing to talk out of school. And if they were willing to talk out of school,
How did you know that?
yeah, and when they were willing to talk out of school, that meant they were willing to break rules. Now, not everybody who wants was willing to talk out of school at sort of a lighter level wants to become a paid agent for the CIA, but that's what we would do. And we would just look for that sort of thing. So you'd go to a diplomatic party, or maybe we knew a guy was doing tennis at a certain tennis club. We'd just go start playing tennis next to him and get to know him and then start talking to him and kind of see if he seemed like the type that would break rules. Often it was people that were unhappy with their bosses or unhappy with their pay. People who spy against America they're all psychologically crazy, to be honest, because who would want to do that? It's a big risk,
I want to get one student question in before we go stand up.
So anyway, that's
come on out real quick.
So this is more of a career question for you, but you said you were stationed in Moscow in the 80s. Were you there when the Soviet Union collapsed? And if so, what was it like being CIA at the time?
No, I left Moscow. I was in Moscow from 89 to 91. I left 1 month before it collapsed. And I was in Warsaw at that point. You weren't supposed to say that, Andy.
Susan, just a quick question. Your line of work, pretty unusual for this room. What was the relationship like between you and your wonderful husband in terms of all through this? What could you share with him? What could you talk about? And just open that up just a bit.
And raising 2 kids while you were doing this.
Oh, I can do that one next. So regarding, what's his name over here? Andy. So my second tour was Warsaw, and that was his first tour. And we met, and because of where I worked, I was undercover there as an economic officer. But people who were not the local hires kind of figured out who CIA was and who wasn't. If they actually worked like in the consular section, you had to tell the consular chief, this guy who's working for you is actually CIA. And that way you get partnerships so he understands why he disappears and actually helps, with the cover and everything else with everybody else inside the embassy. And so, so that kind of thing works out well. And, oh, sorry. What? Yeah, I'm not sure I'll hand this over to him, but I will. And so I remember more recently in Israel, I'll just give you a different one, not from Moscow. In my last tour in Israel, which was my last tour overseas, I had Mossad came to me and said, hey, we've got a Mossad officer who wants to go visit his family in America. Can you help, with his visa? And I said, sure. And he goes, well, because we did that for each other, honestly. If one of us wanted to visit Israel, they could do that. It was like a nice thing to do. So anyway, so I go to him, and to Andy's. Somebody, I go to Andy and I say, hey, this guy from Mossad wants to travel to America. And he's like, fine. I said, well, wait. But he was caught in America getting a fake identity because he was going to become some kind of illegal spy in America with American citizenship, and then he would go overseas, and Mossad would do this, by the way, and we always gave him what for it, would do this sometimes. And so where they would try to use, they say, we never use American cover or anything like that. Yeah, you do, kind of thing. And so, but anyway, so this guy had come, and he had done this, but he wanted to go visit his family. So I go down to his office, and I ask Andy, hey, Andy, this guy, and I explain, had done this. He says, no. He goes, you go talk to my deputy. And so I go, and I tell the story to the deputy, and I said, and who hasn't at one time, gone in alias, to another country and, and forged a passport? And she goes, I haven't. Needless to say, he didn't get to go.
We are out of time, but I want to finish to bring it back to journalism. You use a lot of open source material, journalism material. What do you see as the state of journalism right now, and what is your message to some of these students about the importance of this craft, not just in journalism, but what does it mean for CIA, the country?
Yeah, so first, why is journalism important? It's the fifth estate, you guys. It's what keeps the government in checks and balances, honestly, more than the government keeps itself. You're the ones that get sources, that find ways to put that information in a news feed of some sort and get it out there so that people will know the truth of what's happening. And a democracy doesn't exist without journalism. And I don't care what form it's in. Print is going away, and so YouTube is coming up, and podcasts are coming up, and this and that. And it's very, very different than my day, where it was basically, TV, radio, or news. Now you've got a bunch of ways that you can do it. And I think that is really cool. The one fear I have is if you're doing podcasts, you don't necessarily have an editor over you telling you to be honest. So you have to be careful about that, that sort of thing. And so what I see is we're still going to need journalists. We still need people to get out there and get the news because, normal podcasters can't dig deep as well as we do or do the research that we do, et cetera. The format is going to keep changing, and we need to keep adjusting and saying thumbs up. If it changes, it changes. We need to adjust to that, is all I'm saying.
Susan Miller, thank you very much for being our keynote today.